The Republic employed many tanks and military walkers in the countless ground battles of the Clone Wars, but by far the most iconic Republic vehicle was the AT-TE. Making its debut in the Grand Army's first outing on Geonosis, the all-terrain tactical enforcer served with distinction from the beginning of the war to its end, earning a reputation as one of the toughest war machines ever made. But what made the AT-TE tick? How many clones did it take to crew it, and what were their roles? In this video, we'll discuss everything you could possibly want to know about this fearsome Republic war machine.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The AT-TE was an engineering marvel developed by Rothana Heavy Engineering specifically for the Grand Army of the Republic. Its design was inspired by the Arctic Horny Whelmer, a massive beast native to Rothana renowned for how hard it was to kill. The AT-TE were just as resilient as these beasts, heavily armored behemoths vulnerable only on their undersides where the fuel tanks were. The AT-TE was huge, boasting spacious interior cabins and plenty of weaponry, and it was propelled by 6 stubby legs. The unconventional stance of the AT-TE, which mimicked that of the Arctic Horny Whelmer, made it one of the most stable military walkers in service, spreading out the walker's weight over a broad area. The walker's feet could magnetize, allowing them to operate on metal-rich asteroids or cliffsides and the hulls of warships. Despite the AT-TE's size and its short legs, the walker could reach speeds of 60 km per hour, allowing it to rapidly cross battlefields to deploy its embarked troops. The heavily armored body of the AT-TE contained 2 large cabins separated by a flexible, less armored section that housed the walker's engines and main power generator. In the walker's default configuration, each cabin could comfortably hold 10 clone troopers, and the 2 cabins were connected by a narrow passage that ran through the power generator section. These cabins could be accessed by a pair of ramps built on either side of the walker's center legs. When the hatches were sealed, the cabins could be pressurized, allowing the walkers to carry personnel through the vacuum of space. A life support system built into the walker's rear supplied the cabins with fresh air, recycling it from outside or using the walker's reserves, which could last for up to 3 weeks. Apart from the 2 main cabins, this system also supplied air to the walker's cockpit at the front of the craft. The AT-TE was heavily armed, making it a powerful presence on the battlefield. It featured 6 anti-personnel laser cannons mounted on ball turrets, 2 at the walker's rear and 4 in a cluster around the cockpit. These were designed to mow down enemy infantry, but they were highly effective against enemy vehicles too, especially smaller dwarf spider droids and crab droids. The AT-TE's main weapon, however, was a top-mounted mass driver cannon, an extremely powerful artillery piece that fired energized shells, much like the missile tubes of the armored assault tank. This weapon could crack even battleship-grade armor and level enemy fortifications. So how did the AT-TE work exactly? Well, it was operated by a crew of 7, 1 driver, 1 spotter, and 5 gunners. The driver and spotter were stationed in the cockpit and typically wore standard clone armor with modified pilot's helmets, which sported yellow stripes and no fins. The driver and spotter entered the cockpit from the front, where the cockpit canopy could be raised and the bars on the front of the cockpit could swing down to form a ladder. Inside, the driver would sit up front while the spotter would sit directly behind him, out of view through the cockpit windows. The driver's job was exclusively to pilot the walker, which he did via a pair of control levers and foot pedals. He alone of the crew had no control over the walker's weaponry, though AT-TE drivers often trampled enemy infantry or fortifications when they got the chance. The spotter, meanwhile, operated a periscope and rangefinder mounted at the front of the craft. This allowed him to scan battlefields for targets. The spotter's job was to coordinate the AT-TE's 5 gunners, picking out targets and assigning them to different gunners. Though this might seem like a redundant job, it allowed AT-TE crews to make the most of their walkers' many weapons, as gunnery crews could efficiently divide targets between them. The AT-TE's main gunner, the most visible member of the walker's crew, operated the mass driver cannon. His station was built into the cannon, making him an easy target for separatist snipers. In exchange for his vulnerability, the main gunner got to operate the ATTE's most powerful gun, which had a 360-degree turn radius and a high elevation range. Typically, the main gunner was the most skilled and most heavily armored of the 5 gunners. Nonetheless, this position had the highest casualty rate in ATTE crews, and main gunners were replaced so often that there was a ladder and exit hatch just behind the main cannon, allowing troopers from the forward cabin to ascend and replace a slain gunner. The 4 other gunners operated the ATTE's anti-personnel cannons. These men were housed in the walkers' main cabins, with 2 stationed at the front of the forward cabin and 2 at the rear of the aft cabin. Each rear gunner manned an aft turret, while the forward gunners each controlled 2 linked fire turrets. This might seem like an absurd amount of gunners for just 6 anti-personnel cannons, but it allowed the ATTE's anti-personnel weapons to fire on 4 targets at once and decimate incoming infantry. The driver, spotter, and gunners made up the official, dedicated crew of the ATTE, but there were other important roles aboard these walkers that weren't covered by the 7 crewmen. Depending on the ATTE's configuration, the 2 main cabins could house additional crew or clone troopers acting in informal crew roles. Since these positions were inconstant and usually filled by passengers instead of dedicated crew, they were typically left out of crew numbers for these walkers. On standard ATTE models, both cabins were pretty similar. Each contained 2 gunner stations, seats for 10 clone troopers, and racks for the clones' blaster rifles, with seat restraints and inertial compensators to prevent passengers from being jostled around during combat. The clones in these cabins rotated in and out of the walker on a regular basis, but most walkers in this configuration carried at least 1 squad of clones at all times. Other ATTE configurations featured heavy alterations to the rear cabin, which was converted into a mobile command center or a storage bay for a pair of ATRTs. Specialized ATTEs often required additional crew. Walkers with command centers typically had on-board command staff, while walkers with ATRT lifts carried 2 ATRT pilots and mechanics to service the scout walkers while they weren't in use. Sometimes, ATTEs of any configuration carried clone engineers who performed maintenance on the walker during battle. Standard configuration ATTEs usually carried IM-6 medical droids in a locker along with emergency medical supplies. The droids could patch wounded clones so they could continue to fight. When required, an ATTE's passengers could be pressed into service as snipers, firing at enemy infantry from behind armored hatches. As we mentioned earlier, they could also act as replacement gunners. Embarked clones in the forward cabin were called upon to reload the ammunition belt for the mass driver cannon, for example, since the ammo belt, which was located in the main cabin ceiling, had to be reloaded by hand from ammo storage compartments built into the cabin's floor. Clone troopers in either compartment could also be called upon to perform emergency maintenance if an onboard engineer wasn't present. ATTEs were usually abuzz with activity, more so than you might expect. They not only carried 2 large crews into battle, but also more than a dozen clones who, when not resting, could also lend a hand to the walker's crew. In battle, clone units formed up around advancing ATTEs, with squads regularly rotating between rides in the walker's cabins and action on the ground. This allowed even standard configuration ATTEs to serve as mobile command posts, vital nodes in the web that was the Grand Army of the Republic. The ATTE's crew wasn't even the largest among Republic tanks. That award goes to the Juggernaut, which required a minimum crew of 20 and, depending on the configuration, could carry up to 300 men. But what do you think? If you were part of an ATTE crew, which position would you prefer? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.